Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the AEMO Quarterly Energy Dynamics Report for Q4 2024. My name is Franca Tamaris, the Events Coordinator at the Melbourne Energy Institute. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today we are gathered on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung people, who have been custodians of this land for thousands of years, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders past and present. Some housekeeping rules before we start. All questions must be submitted through the Q&A option on the menu as the chat function is disabled. We will have some time for questions during the session and at the end as well, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as possible. Now to introduce our speaker for today, please welcome Kerry Galloway, Manager Market Insights at the Australian Energy Market Operator. Kerry leads a team responsible for the Quarterly Energy Dynamics Report, a key publication from AEMO. With 20 years of experience in the energy industry, she has worked in various areas of the wholesale and retail gas and electricity markets, including demand forecasting, network planning and connections, and market reform delivery. Kerry holds a Bachelor of Engineering, Mechanical, and a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics from Monash University. Today's moderator is Dr. Sleeman Mahana, Senior Research Fellow, Electrical and Electronic Engineering at the University of Melbourne. Thanks again for joining us, and now over to Kerry.
Thank you, Franca. So thank you for having me here today to discuss the Quarterly Energy Dynamics for Q4 2024 with this report covering the months of October, November and December of 2024. So AEMO's Quarterly Energy Dynamics, or the QED as we like to say, provides a detailed overview of the quarterly outcomes for all the different markets that AEMO operates, which is shown here on this slide. Today I'll be focusing on the national electricity market outcomes and the East Coast gas outcomes. So I encourage everyone to read the QED for updates on the Western Australia markets. So I'll be starting with the NEM dynamics and starting with NEM demand. So the chart on the left here shows that the underlying demand for the NEM reached 23,737 megawatts, which was a 2.4% increase from the same quarter in the previous year. And this was a new record for Q4 underlying NEM demand. And this growth in underlying demand was largely due to warmer temperatures, but we've also noted some signs of electrification, potentially shifting demand from gas to electricity over the past year. And this will be explored more in some of AEMO's forecasting reports for both gas and electricity this year. So we also saw a record high in distributed PV or rooftop PV output, which averaged just over 4,050 megawatts. And that was an increase of 18% from Q4 2023. And this strong rooftop PV output was driven by growth in rooftop PV installations and also higher solar exposure in the major cities. Now, this growth helped offset the underlying demand increase, resulting in actually a slight decrease in the operational demand, where the operational demand is the one that is served from the NEM main grid. So the chart on the top right-hand side here shows the impact of the rooftop PV during daylight hours when the operational demand, shown here in this red dashed line, dropped compared to the previous year. While outside the daylight hours, operational demand remained higher than during the year before, or the quarter in the year before. And underneath that chart, we have the regional breakdown, with all mainland regions actually recording their highest Q4 underlying demand since at least 2016, while Tasmania did see a reduction in operational demand. Now, all regions, including Tasmania, saw record high average rooftop PV output levels, offsetting the growth in underlying demand. And as a result, operational demand was less or flat in all regions apart from Queensland, which had just a small increase. So while the quarterly average operational demand remained largely unchanged year on year, the range of demand outcomes did show sort of an expansion on both ends of the scale. So on this slide, the chart on the left is looking at the 30-minute maximum operational demand trends for Q4, and then the chart on the right shows the same for the minimum demand trends. So looking at the maximums first, we had several extremely hot days in the quarter, particularly during the second half of the quarter, and NEM-wide operational demand recorded a new Q4 high of 3,716 megawatts. It was actually Monday, 16th of December. And this was just 0.5% higher from the previous Q4, but that previous Q4 high was set all the way back in 2009. And also in December, Queensland and Victoria also had their highest ever Q4 maximum demands, with Victoria surpassing a record last set in 2012. And so moving then to the right-hand side of the slide, at the other end of the scale, the quarter also witnessed episodes of sort of mild temperatures and sunny day with high rooftop PV output, leading to all regions, apart from Victoria, recording all-time minimum demand records. So NEM-wide operational demand reached a new minimum low of 10,073 on Saturday, 26th of October. And then Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia also recorded new minimum demand records in October, and Tasmania had a new minimum on Christmas Day, and actually Victoria had a minimum demand on New Year's Day, but that's just outside this quarter, Q4 2024. So moving on to prices. So in Q4 2024, NEM wholesale electricity spot prices averaged $88 per megawatt hour across the NEM, which was an increase of 83% compared to Q4 in 2023, but a decrease of 26% from Q3 2024. So the chart on the left shows NEM-wide average prices by time of day, comparing Q4 2024 with Q4 2023. If you look at this chart, it shows a couple of notable changes year on year. So the first is an increase in overnight average prices, and this was driven by the higher average operational demand, which we just talked about, and lower availability from coal generators. And the numbers are shown here underneath the chart, but we'll also discuss that some more in the generation section later on. And secondly, the other notable difference is this notable jump in average evening peak prices. And this was primarily driven by a number of high price events occurring in November and early December. And these high price events, as always, are driven by a combination of coinciding factors, which included several coal outages, some transmission outages, and those occurring at the same time on some high demand days, which caused some high price events, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland. Now the chart on the right shows the regional average prices for the quarter. It compares Q4 2024 with Q4 2023 and with Q3 2024. So the solid bars represent the energy prices, which is the average spot prices capped at $300 per megawatt hour, and the shaded stacks on the top show the cap return component, which is the contribution of the spot prices in excess of $300 per megawatt hour. And now this chart and the table underneath shows that all regions recorded higher energy price components on a year-on-year basis, while the cap return component increased significantly in Queensland and New South Wales. And in fact, this increased high price volatility contributed to Queensland and New South Wales recording their highest quarterly average spot prices for a Q4 in this quarter. And then comparing to the quarter previous, so the Q3, prices in Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania did decrease significantly, while those in the northern regions increased, and that was principally due to that increased high price volatility. Okay, so looking at price setting, which obviously plays a major part in those prices. So the chart here shows the price setting frequency of the different fuel types, and the average fuel price, the average price set by each of these fuel types were marginal, comparing Q4 2024 with Q4 2023. So as shown in the box below the chart, the price setting frequency dropped for black coal, brown coal and hydro, while all other fuel types recorded increases in price setting frequency. And in terms of the average price set where marginal, there were material upward movements for most fuel types, with notable increases for black coal, hydro, gas and battery generation. So I'll just start with black coal, which saw the most notable drop in price setting frequency. That declined from 30% of dispatch intervals down to 22% this quarter. And this reduction in price setting frequency coincided with the lower availability and then reduced offers, reduced volumes offered at most price bands. So overall, the black coal generators offered around 700 megawatts less on average at prices under $100 per megawatt hour. And as a result, the black coal set prices at an average of $108 per megawatt hour, up from $58 per megawatt hour during quarter 4 2023. So quite an increase there. Price setting of brown coal also dropped from 9% to 6%, again reflecting lower generation availability. But however, the price set by brown coal when marginal actually decreased a little bit from 16 to 11. Now, hydro does remain the most frequent price setter this quarter, but it did see a slight decrease in price setting from 35 to 34%, and the average price set by hydro was, when marginal, increased from $71 to $111 per megawatt hour. Now, gas set prices in 9% of intervals, up from 5% in the previous year. And this was really driven by a notable rise in the volumes offered by gas generators in most price bands. So, but increased gas generation, particularly in those sort of volatile early peak periods, resulted in higher averages prices set by gas, averaging $189, up from $137. And battery generation set the prices in 4% of intervals this quarter, up from 2% in quarter 4 2023. Now, batteries again primarily set the prices during those evening peak high price volatility periods, and that led them to having the largest year-on-year growth in average price set for any source, averaging $309 per megawatt hour, up from $198 per megawatt hour. Now, wind and the grid scale solar both set prices in 10% of intervals this quarter, and the prices that they set at were a little bit higher than in the previous year, so negative 36, sorry, and negative $30 per megawatt hour. Okay. Now, on this slide, we're going to look briefly at the price separation between regions this quarter. And the charts on the left of this slide show the average energy price by time of day in different regions. We've all charts been for quarter 4 2024. So firstly, on the chart on the top, there was a market price separation between northern and southern mainland regions, and we have seen this in previous quarters, so it's sort of an ongoing price separation. And this separation was evident throughout most hours of the day, increasing during the daytime hours. And during the daytime hours, the average northward, so the export limit on flows across the Victorian to New South Wales interconnector remained close to zero when that interconnector was binding, which really limited flows into New South Wales and resulted in higher prices in New South Wales compared to Victoria. So the middle chart here compares the New South price with the Queensland time of day energy prices. And in the daytime hours, New South Wales prices were typically higher than Queensland, and there was frequent binding of the southward, so the import limits on the Queensland to New South Wales interconnector. And then that dynamic shifted during the overnight hours, with Queensland prices typically higher those in New South Wales, and average flows across QNI, or Queensland to New South Wales interconnector, changed direction to northward from New South Wales into Queensland, and then sometimes binding and contributing to that price separation. And then the bottom chart here shows quite a notable price separation between Victoria and Tasmania, with Tasmania's average energy price higher than Victoria's during daytime hours. And this is due to Baslink's import capacity being frequently reached, so that constrains the transfer of lower cost energy from the mainland in those daytime hours. And that's actually part of the reason why Tasmania's quarterly average price was notably higher than Victoria's, despite Tasmania being the region to experience, quite significantly lower operational demand compared to the same period last year. Okay, so on the topic of interconnectors, we're just going to have a quick look at the interregional energy transfers for the NEM for the quarter, and these totaled 3,074 gigawatt hours in Q4 2024, which was a drop of 9.1% compared to Q4 2023. So I'm just going to look at the main changes year on year here. So the net flows from Queensland to New South Wales reduced significantly. They were from $183 megawatts down to 73 megawatts this quarter. And QNI, the Queensland to New South Wales interconnector, saw a notable reduction in flows from Queensland to New South Wales at all times of the day, except during the evening peak, and that's shown on the chart on the top right. And these daytime reductions in transfers from Queensland were due in part to some significant transmission outages affecting QNI during October and early November, which constrained southward flow limits. And then back to the Victorian to New South Wales interconnector, or VNI, the net flows also decreased, driven by the lower exports into New South Wales. So these average net flows on VNI dropped from 339 megawatts to 275 megawatts this quarter, and northward flows on VNI reduced across most hours of the day due to those lower export limits on VNI when binding, which is what is shown on the chart, the middle chart on the right. And this was due to several sort of outage related constraints binding for significant periods across the quarter. And then the bottom one shows us that the average net southward flows on Basslink reduced across all hours of the day, with flows actually shifting northward in some overnight hours. So stronger overnight demand in Victoria, along with that lower brown coal availability, led to higher exports from Tasmania to Victoria. So the net flows reduced from 252 megawatts to 135 megawatts this quarter. So just going to have a look at the FCAS, or the frequency control and ancillary service outcomes. So total FCAS costs for Q4 2024 was 61 million. It's actually 25 million increase from Q3 in 2024, and this was really driven by an increase in Queensland's FCAS costs. They went from 10 million last year, to 47 million this Q4, and in fact the costs in New South Wales and Victoria both reduced significantly, so it really was Queensland. And those Queensland costs, a large part of that increase incurred on just one day, which was 11th of October, where Queensland incurred FCAS costs of 22 million, and that was really due to a network outage. It was a planned network outage which affected the Queensland to New South Wales interconnectors, which increased the region's risk of separating from the rest of the NEM. So we needed to have local enablement of FCAS, and the local price for some of the FCAS services hit the market price cap, leading to that higher costs. So on the right-hand side, we just show that batteries do continue to be the dominant technology providing FCAS, with a 55% volume share this quarter. And the other technologies which have also experienced increases in enablement are your virtual power plants and demand response. So we're definitely seeing a shift to these newer technologies in providing the FCAS services, as opposed to the coal and the hydro. Actually, I was going to pause here for some questions. Sleeman?
Yep, we do have a couple of questions.
Cool.
First one is from Tim. Tim is asking, how was the price setting of battery load calculated for this analysis? So he's referring to slide 7, by the way.
Yep.
Uh, so yeah, how was the price setting of battery load computed for this analysis? This is the first part of the question. I'll let you answer that, and then there's a small second part. Actually, they're related. Maybe the second part says, how does it differ to battery generation?
Okay. Yep. So a battery generation price setting is calculated in the same way as any of the other generators. So it's the working out what the price that technology set when it was marginal, and it's when it's marginal, the price setting is actually from the next 1 megawatt of generation that would supply the load is the marginal price setter, but it also can be from the reduction in load. So that's how the battery load comes into it. So the marginal price setter was actually a battery load by reducing the load it was taking from the NEM, then that then becomes the price setter. So it's just the opposite. So one is the 1 megawatt extra generator, and then the one is one reduction in load, but both can serve the same purpose of meeting the supply demand balance. I hope that made some sense.
Thanks, Kerry. The next question is from David. He's asking, which outcomes in Q4 of 2024 were least expected, and how have those outcomes changed AEMO's thinking?
Ooh, least expected. I guess the combination of those peak kind of prices, the combination of factor that led to those peak prices, that was on the 27th of November, and so I think it was the 7th of December. So to me, that having that really high demand in Q4 was probably not that expected. Q4 is not, is usually a little bit milder on the demand stakes, and having those maximum demands and then combining with outages, which were mainly planned, and then also planned transmission outages. So I think there's going to have to be a little bit of thought about, the likelihood of having those kind of temperatures at the same time of those planned outages, because, Q4 is often a good time to have maintenance outages in the past, and maybe it's like having a better look of what the demand might be in late November, early December. But really, I'm talking for myself somewhat there, not really necessarily an official AEMO view. But it does get difficult to schedule maintenance when you only have less, when you start having very warm weather in November.
Thanks, Gary. The next question is, what actions are being taken to improve the interstate transmission reliability, and also when are new connectors/capacity expected?
Okay. Yeah. So the kind of these. Let me just go to these charts here. Particularly, like if you look at Tasmania and Victoria, that's quite a big DC interconnector. The really the next sort of big interconnector plan for there is Marinus Link, and I'm not 100% sure on the current plan timing of that, but it's definitely sort of later on, in this, I think 2028 or onwards. And it's a bit the same with New South Wales to Victoria. It's those sort of large ISP projects that will make the most amount of difference, but they're, and also different projects within New South Wales. So you'd have to refer to the the ISP for timing on the big projects, but there are also sometimes smaller works within the region that can help. But again, I'd probably have to refer to each region's transmission network service providers annual planning report for what they have planned specifically.
Thanks, Kerry. We have one more question. Do we know what are the main drivers behind the year-on-year average spot price increase? So that's Freddie asking.
Yeah, okay. So the main drivers are definitely the reduction in the black and brown coal availability, and then the flow-on effect to their offer volumes where they're offering less capacity at low prices. Then we also have the increase in operational demand. So they're the two sort of main drivers on the sort of the energy increase in prices. So that's kind of across the day, and then those volatility events. With that sort of combination of having high demand with some restricted availability are the main sort of three drivers.
Yeah, thanks. Franca, do we have room or time for more questions? I'll take it as a yes. So
we'll leave the rest for later on at the end.
So pause for now.
We'll take one more.
One more. All right. Yeah, anonymous question. Thanks for the preso. Have you seen any noticeable uplift in underlying demand from data centers? And this is the first part of the question. Second part is, what other drivers are there? So data centers.
Yeah, okay. Look, we definitely have projects on looking at the data center demand. It's not at the level of demand we look at for the QAD, which is more just the grid demand, but we are tracking that, and there is definitely growth in that space, the data center space. Some other drivers are we do have population growth. We've not seen a huge growth in the amount of connections, but there is still population growth, which obviously increases energy use. And the other aspect that we noted is we're definitely seeing a decrease in gas demand from sort of residential, industrial and commercial, which is sort of coinciding with the increase in the energy demand, electricity demand. So we're looking at to try and quantify the change in people using gas appliances instead using electricity, and that's in the residential but also commercial and industrial spaces. So that's something that AEMO's forecasting teams will be looking at in more detail for their forecasts that they'll be releasing this year for both gas and electricity.
Oh, thanks, Kerry. There's one more quick question. Let's take it now, I think. Has overall power generation increased year on year, including power from all sources?
Yep, actually, I'm about to go to generation. So do we want to do that? And then that will definitely answer that question. So if we're happy with that, sorry, I'm just struggling to make my slides go to where. So it's just, okay, next slide. There we go, got it back. Oh, went too many. Sorry, my computer's been glitchy. So let me go back. You're just having a sneak preview of the upcoming slides at this point. Come on. One more. But yes, generation sources have gone up at all. Sorry, my screen is just responding to very late slide. That's okay. Okay, one more question. Oh, no. Sorry about this. What slide do you have up at the moment, Sleeman? Is that, oh, am I on mute? No, can you hear me?
Black and brown coal generation at record lows.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So hopefully it'll now respond to where it needs to be. So this shows us the overall NEM generation. So we're back to that question that was asked. So NEM generation from all sources did increase 3.3% from Q4 2023 levels. And that was driven by that growth in underlying demand, along with some increased needs for battery charging and hydro pumping. So the chart on the top left shows the year-on-year changes in average generation. So we see the increase in the distributed PV or the rooftop solar, which I already discussed, along with increases in grid-scale solar, gas, hydro, and then to a lesser extent, battery generation, biomass, and wind generation. So these increases were partially offset by the reductions in the black and brown coal generation. So the table underneath that chart shows the changes in each fuel type's contribution to the overall supply mix. And we can see that both black and brown coal reduce their supply mix contribution by 1.7 percentage points each, and wind then by 0.4 percentage points. But all the other types increase their volume share. And the average share from renewables, so that contribution for renewables on an average basis reached 46%, which was a new all-time record. And the contribution from coal, so black and brown coal together, dipped just under 50%. And that was the first time that's ever, that the contribution from coal has been less than half. And then if we look at the chart on the right, which again shows those changes in generation, but now it shows it on a time of day basis. And we can see here that the solar generation, so that's both the grid scale solar and the rooftop solar, we can see how it's increasing across the daytime hours, which is kind of as you expect. And then we can see that the gas, hydro and battery generation are increasing across the day, but particularly in that evening peak period. Then we see brown coal reduced across all hours of the day, and black coal sort of increased in the sort of overnight and early hours of the morning before being lower in the morning and afternoon peaks compared to the prior year. So, in this slide, we'll be looking more closely at the black coal-fired generation. So the left-hand chart shows black coal generation and availability in New South Wales and Queensland. And overall, the black coal availability was at an all-time low. It was down 6.5% year on year. And generation was also at an all-time low, but that was just down 1% year on year. So looking at New South Wales first in the blue, an 8.4 reduction in availability was driven by an increase in capacity on full unit outage. And that was predominantly planned outages, but it also included extended planned outages. So, when units didn't come back on their originally planned date, but needed to be out for longer to keep repairing. But despite this reduction in availability, the New South Wales coal generation did actually increase a little bit. It was up 1.3%. So all the power stations in the New South Wales, the coal-fired ones, had high utilisation rates this quarter compared to the same quarter in the previous year. In Queensland, the availability was down 4.4%. And this was actually driven by reductions of what we call partial derating. So the unit is still available, but it's not able to run at its full normal rated capacity. And the capacity on full unit outage did actually decrease slightly year on year. But generation did reduce by 3.2%, with almost all of the Queensland black coal stations having lower output. And then if we look at the right-hand side, we can see similar trends in the brown coal-fired generation. So in this quarter, brown coal generation dropped to 3,002 megawatts on average, and that was its lowest recorded level, and that was 9.2% lower than in Q4 2023. So this reduction in output was partially due to a 5.9% decrease in availability, and that was due to an increase on capacity on full unit outage, again, mainly planned maintenance. But we did also see a reduction in utilisation, with generation decreasing across all hours of the day, and particularly across the daylight hours. So we did see an increase in what we call the intraday swing, which is the difference between the average maximum generation and the minimum generation levels. And that's shown here on this chart on the bottom right. And this increase in the flex was enabled by a lowering of the minimum output levels at the Loy Yang and Loy Yang B Loy Yang A and Loy Yang B units this quarter. So moving on to gas and hydro generation. So on the left-hand side, you can see that NEM gas-fired generation averaged 1,011 megawatts, which was a 19% increase from the previous Q4. And all regions, except for Tasmania, saw an increase in their gas-fired generation. But the largest increase was in Queensland, which had a 20% increase. And this was particularly evident during those evening peak hours. And that was driven by reductions in black coal generation in those hours, along with increased exports to New South Wales during those hours. And hydro generation on the right there was 1,612 megawatts on average, which was up 10% from the previous Q4, but slightly lower than the levels in the two preceding quarters. And all regions had higher hydro generation apart from New South Wales, which just had a slight 1% decrease. So this slide shows the Q4 2024 outcomes for the grid scale solar and wind generation. So the chart on the top left shows the average generation for the quarter, and then the chart underneath that shows the changes from Q4 2023 on a regional basis. So solar generation increased by 9.4 to average 2,012 megawatts, but wind generation barely changed with just a 0.4 increase to 3,160 megawatts. And if we look at the charts on the year-on-year changes on that regional basis, we can see that that growth in output was really driven by New South Wales, which had increases in both grid scale solar, which was up 14%, and wind generation, which was up 6.3% in New South Wales. So then the charts on the right actually show the same year-on-year changes in wind and solar, but in different categories. So that shows us those changes in the categories of new capacity, commissioning, existing fleet, curtailment and offloading. So new and commissioning availability refers to the new facilities since Q4 2023, so like a year ago, or those that have been commissioning or sort of ramping up their output between a year ago and now. And offloading is the economic offloading, and this refers to availability that was offered into the market in bid bands with higher prices than the outturn regional reference price, and hence were not dispatched. And then curtailment then refers to any remaining limitation on the output. So basically the difference between the availability and the generation that was not due to economic offloading. So if we look at the top chart, we can see that most of the growth in grid scale solar generation was from new and commissioning solar capacity. And this was primarily in New South Wales with 155 megawatts, followed by Victoria with 56 megawatts. There was a small increase in output from the existing solar fleet, which did see slightly improved availability capacity factors, increasing up to 31.8% from 31.2% in Q4 2023. That, however, curtailment increased by 23 megawatts and economic offloading also increased. It was up by 66 megawatts. So overall, that led to the grid scale solar generation increasing by 191 megawatts on average. And then underneath that, we have the same categories for wind. So again, the growth was mainly due to new capacity and commissioning, and which was again primarily in New South Wales, which had 136 megawatts, and Victoria with 123 megawatts. However, the existing wind fleet capacity declined by 263 megawatts on average, and that was due to lower availability capacity factors, which fell from 33.5% down to 30.9%. And this was driven by lower wind speeds, as well as some facility and network outages that impacted availability of the existing fleet. Network curtailment actually decreased by 26 megawatts. However, the offloading increased by 72 megawatts. And overall, the wind generation only increased by 12 megawatts on average. So that's the renewables on a kind of average basis. Now if we look at them on a peak basis or a 30-minute basis, so The left-hand side chart shows the highest 30-minute renewable contribution for each of the quarters. And in this quarter, a new record for peak renewable contribution was set at, with renewables supplying 75.6% of total generation during the half-hour interval ending at 1 p.m. on 6th of November. And in that period, the rooftop PV accounted for 43%, grid-scale solar was 19%, and the wind made up just 11%. Now, on the right-hand chart, we show the renewable contributions to meeting the daily maximum operational demand. And you can see here there is quite a difference between the fuel mix on this measure and then the chart on the left. And this is because the daily maximum operational demand typically occurs in the sort of early evening when the solar generation has rolled off. So renewable supply at this time is from hydro and wind primarily. And the average renewable contribution to the daily maximum demand reached a new all-time high of 33.5%. We also show the maximum minimum contributions, which both also increased from the previous year. And then I'm going to finish the NEM section with the battery outcomes. So on the left-hand side, we have the estimated battery revenue broken up into its various components. And on the right, we have the battery generation and the price spread. And the price spread represents the arbitrage revenue of the batteries per megawatt hour generation. So you can sort of get a measure of if it's just the generation or the capacity of the batteries increasing, or are they also increasing their individual revenue. So the components of the battery revenue are shown in the box there. So the overall net revenue of the batteries was 69.5 million, which was more than double from the previous quarter four. And the arbitrage revenue, which is 48 million, is made up of the energy revenue, which is 58 million minus the energy cost of 10 million. So the energy revenue is the, from selling the battery generation to the market, and the energy cost is from buying the generation or the load for the battery. And we also have the FCAS revenue, which increased to 21 million. And in this quarter, the FCAS revenue made up 31% of the total battery revenue this quarter. So the right-hand side shows how the battery generation has been growing over time and how the price spread has been changing over that time. So this quarter, the battery generation increased by 91% from quarter four 2023, and the NEM-wide price spread for the batteries averaged $243 per megawatt hour, up from $129 in quarter four 2023. So this quite substantial increase in the price spread reflects the higher price volatility in this quarter, which allowed battery operators to capture more volume during those peak pricing events, particularly in the northern regions. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the East Coast gas market dynamics for quarter four 2024. I'm just going to start with the East Coast gas prices and demand. So the chart on the left shows the domestic gas prices during the quarter, and the East Coast wholesale gas prices averaged $13.60 per gigajoule for the quarter, which was actually 26% higher than quarter four 2023 and 9% higher than quarter three 2024. And this increase was really driven by higher gas demand, particularly in Queensland. And that also led to quite significant price separation between the states, with Brisbane averaging $14.71 per gigajoule, and Vic Market averaging $12.25 per gigajoule. And we can see that on this slide here, with the purple being the Brisbane line and the grey being the Victorian. Usually they track quite closely together. So this price separation this quarter was quite significant, and we'll go into that a little bit more, the drivers for that a little bit more. So the chart on the right-hand side shows the gas demand for the quarter, and this increased overall by 4% from quarter 4 2023, and that was driven by record demand for Queensland LNG exports. That was up by 17 petajoules. And then also we had higher supply to gas-fired generators, so up 4 petajoules, whereas the AEMO markets demand, which is the commercial, industrial and residential demand, decreased by 3 petajoules. And that was somewhat impacted by the warmer than average temperatures across the quarter. So with those record LNG exports, there was also record production from the Queensland projects associated with those exports, primarily driven by APLNG. And this chart on the left shows the production here, and you can see that it's higher than any other quarter 4, and in fact higher than any other quarter, which is in the greyed out bars. However, with that increased export demand, and I will note that there were 99 cargoes exported during the quarter, up from 87 cargoes in quarter 4 2023, there was actually reduced supply from the Queensland LNG producers into the domestic market. So even though they produced more, they needed to use that for their own exports. And this chart on the right shows that the supply from those LNG projects was 6.7 petajoules lower than in the year before, and the lowest domestic market supply for a quarter 4 since 2017. And this is shown on the chart on the right. So with that reduced domestic supply from the Queensland producers, we had higher exports from Victoria into New South Wales, which is shown on the chart on the left. So that and they were actually, those supplies from Victoria into the northern markets were the highest they'd been for a quarter 4 for the last 5 years. And this increased northerly export was supported by increased production at Otway and Longford, which is shown on the chart on the right. So Otway production was up 6.1 petajoule, and that was due to the Enterprise gas field, which commenced production in June 2024. And Longford production was actually up 3.7 petajoules, which is the first year-on-year increase since quarter 4 2022. And that was helped by having fewer maintenance outages when compared with that quarter. But we also note that the Longford Gas Plant 1, which had been operational since 1969, was retired in October. So that leaves gas plants 2 and 3 in operation, and that limits Longford's production to approximately 700 TJs a day going forward, meaning that sort of production levels we saw during winter 2024 in previous years will no longer be achievable. Okay. And that ends the slides, Salima.
Thanks, Kerry.
That's okay.
All right, time for questions. We have a question. The question is this the trend? So that was related to this is not related to the gas market that you just an analysis that you just talked about. It was for the previous section. Yeah, is this trend expected to continue into Q4 2020 or Q4 of 2025? So a drop in call accompanied by an increase in price. I believe I forgot which slide that was, but it was right before the gas network analysis or gas system analysis.
Yes, probably. We talk about the price drivers here with the drop in coal. Look, I mean, it's one of those questions that you know, there's many things that can work to set the prices, and sometimes you can have one day with very high demand that you have some outages. But I would say that there is a thought that the coal plants are probably not going to get more reliable over time because they are quite old. So we don't expect that the availability of coal generators to increase significantly over time. But what we hope to see, and definitely from the things like integrated system plan and then looking at what's happening with the connections, is more new generation entering the market, particularly wind, solar and battery, to help therefore make up that shortfall from the coal generation reducing.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. The next question is, did you notice any patterns in which generation was increasing when wind production was low?
Yeah. So the wind generation was slightly higher overall, even though the existing fleet didn't have the best. Overall the wind speeds weren't the best, but there was a reasonable amount of new capacity which made up for that. But really, the wind was low sort of in the middle of the day. Compared to the year before, which was really offset by increased grid scale solar. It was quite good in the morning and then overnight, a little bit in the evening peak, which is then made up with the sort of gas, hydro and battery combination.
Yeah. Thanks, Kerry. The next question is, it's regarding emissions data. Question is there a graph or comparison showing year-to-year emissions trends that connect changes in the energy spending portfolio?
We definitely do have in the QED, we do have an emissions chart. I can't remember what figure it is. It's sort of near the back of the generation sections. And I will say that NEM emissions in this quarter were at a record low. So we look in that chart at NEM emissions as a total number for the quarter, like the megatons of CO2 equivalent, and also as an emissions intensity. And they were both down. So yeah, so you have to pick up the QED to see that.
Yeah. And the next question is there a projection on when gas will be phased out and whether it will be replaced by liquid fuels such as hydrogen?
Oh, not that I know of, but we definitely forecast that gas will be quite an essential sort of source for the NEM going forward in the ISP throughout that outlook, the important flexible fuel source. Yeah. I'm not sure if we're talking more on sort of domestic basis with different Victorian government policies around household gas, but again, I'm not sure exactly what the latest status of some of those policies are.
Yeah. Thanks, Kerry. The next question is, various user groups are claiming that there will be Vic gas shortages. Is this warranted based on what AEMO is seeing based on present and future expected trends?
Look, for projections on gas shortages, I would prefer to defer to the gas statement of opportunity, which I believe the updated one will be in March this year. But I also believe that the last one did predict, I would say, definitely tight supply and demand conditions. The Victorian, with Longford shutting down and without we have the Enterprise coming on, but the production in Victoria will decrease at the existing sources unless we have new sources, just because of that Longford, the one plant less. So yeah, I think there is signs that the supply and demand in the gas is tighter, but yeah, I would definitely say have a look at the gas statement of opportunity when it comes out in March this year, something a month away. Yeah.
Thanks, Kerry. There's a question that just came in now. Does AEMO agree with the view that gas peaking can be replaced by batteries?
Look, I think, I don't, AEMO, when they do the integrated system plan, are looking at the sort of least cost way of serving the supply and demand forecast demand. And they do find that in those studies that the least cost way is to have some gas in the mix, even if that gas is not run very often, just because I guess it fills in those periods if you do have those more severe droughts of wind or extended periods. But yeah, I guess, that's an economic kind of answer, not a technical one.
Yep.
That's all the questions we have. If there's anyone else who wants to submit one, just put that into our Q&A. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Kerry for her presentation and Slayman for moderating, and thank you for joining us all today. We look forward to you joining us again for the next brief. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.